Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this live Northern Shield event. We're joined by Ian Bliss, President and CEO, who will be providing a brief presentation. Following the presentation, we'll open the room to questions, so you can submit your questions in the bottom right corner of your screen. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be made available for viewing shortly after we conclude. With that said, Ian, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much, Kyle, for that introduction. And thank you all for taking the time to taking the presentation entitled The Super Treasure Hunt and Why Root Cellar's Findings Are Just the Tip of the Iceberg. Before I get along with my main portion of the presentation, I do have to bring your attention to this forward-looking statement advisory. This presentation is really going to jump right into the details of the Conquest zone at Root Cellar, but for those that are joining Northern Shield for the first time, it's a little bit of background on who we are. Northern Shield is very well known for thinking outside the box. We're not followers. We initiate our own projects or alongside prospectors in underexplored regions that have the correct geological conditions that support the notion of a giant and high-grade ore deposit. Of course, everyone wants to find a large ore deposit, but you must make sure that the geology supports that notion. And to say that approach has led us to Root Cellar. And while many view greenfield exploration as a risk, we see it very much as an opportunity, and that's an opportunity to discover a tier 1 asset near surface and at relatively low cost, simply because no one has looked there before. And we implement what we call a model-driven approach to our exploration, and that reduces the risk for ourselves, our shareholders, and the environment. And this approach has been very successful in the past, as I said, and has led to partnerships with Hudbay, Teck, South 32, and twice with Implats from South Africa. But I say this strategy has led us to Root Cellar, and we think Root Cellar is well positioned to become the next significant discovery in Canada and has all the ingredients to be a giant and high-grade epithermal gold system. Root Cellar is located on the Burin Peninsula of Newfoundland, just a 3 hours drive from the capital of St. John's. And it's located in what we call the Avalon terrain. And this is very broadly similar to BC's Golden Triangle. We all know, seen a lot of news out of that the past few years, and hosts numerous tier 1 gold and copper assets. But whereas BC's Golden Triangle has been explored and even mined for the better part of a century, the Avalon has seen maybe two decades of exploration. And when it comes to Root Cellar, it's seen no exploration, methodical exploration by a junior mining company until Northern Shield optioned the property from a local prospector. So you can imagine the opportunities that exist at Root Cellar and the surrounding area when it's seen next to no exploration. And the other thing to keep in mind when going through this presentation is its location. Okay, epithermal deposits, when geologists typically think of epithermal systems, they think of the jungles of South America or up the mountains in South America, BC. But this is located, let's say, a 10-minute drive from a deep water port on the Atlantic seaboard. And that will particularly become important if we start exploring the copper portion of this property, because most copper porphyries are on the Pacific rim, whereas this may hold a strategic position on the Atlantic seaboard. But all told, Root Cellar is in a vastly underexplored portion of Newfoundland. And so we're going to jump right in really to the Root Cellar and then the Conquest zone. But what we talked about, we explore for large-scale deposits. And right from day one, there's the indications of that on a regional scale, particularly this rifting. And here's the top left-hand image is a DEM, digital elevation model of the Burin Peninsula. And you can see how Root Cellar sits in this swath of basically lowland area. Everything else is very high. We see a very similar signature on the magnetics, where there's a break in the magnetic signature, the Burin right in here. And we believe that because there's been a period of rifting or extension. Most of the Avalon terrain was actually created by a collisional event, so compression. But when you have compression, it's a little bit harder to get fluids up those fractures. When you have expansion or rifting, there's a lot more opportunity for magma to come up. And if you're enhancing magmatic activity, then you're also enhancing hydrothermal activity. Another key ingredient to the potential size indication at Root Cellar is the presence of tellurium. Now, tellurium is a critical metal. It's a key component in solar panels. 90% of the world's tellurium comes from China right now. So again, it's perhaps a gold system leveraged by the rarest of the critical metals. But the reason why I like tellurium in this case is it's typically associated with very large epithermal gold systems. And think Cripple Creek in the United States, for example. A lot of these big and high-grade gold deposits in Fiji are also associated with tellurium. So a lot of indications from sort of circumstantial evidence that we're onto something very large here very early on in our exploration history at Root Cellar. So Root Cellar hosts a multiple gold and copper occurrences, but the real focus right now and moving into the drill program is at the Conquest Zone. The Conquest Zone itself is a very large footprint, about 4 square kilometers of mineralization. That's both outcrop boulders and soil samples, and even IP, as indicated by these red hashed areas. But the real focus has been in the southern Conquest zone. We're going to start zooming into what we call the Sinter mound area. But much of this gold, and it's all sort of above, most of it's above 100 ppb, but up to 111 grams per ton. A lot of this is what we call leakage. It's not representative of the main epithermal system itself. It's just where gold from that system at depth, or a system at depth, has leaked to surface. But we certainly do, in the southern Conquest zone, start to see very clear evidence of epithermal textures and alterations, and we'll zoom into that portion. Underlying that gold mineralization, as you can see by this turquoise shape, is a magnetic low. The mineralizing events in epithermal systems, the fluids often destroy the magnetic signature of the host rock. So you get a magnetic low as opposed to a magnetic high, which you get in some other deposits. And here's actually a 3D model, but now you're looking at 2D because you're looking at it in plan view. But you can see how well that the gold mineralization, as indicated by these red squares, sort of outlines this magnetic low, which sits beneath it. And we'll have a closer look at that a little bit later. But we'll focus in now. We started on the whole Conquest zone. We're looking at the central portion. Now we're going to focus in on the southern portion of the Conquest zone where the drilling in 2023 occurred. And in that area, we see an area about 100 meters long, 40 meters wide, near continuous gold mineralization. Here's a compilation, again, the red squares representing gold anomalous samples, both in drill core and in surface. You have very large intercepts, 34.5 meters, a moderate grade, 0.6 grams per ton, along with a lot of sporadic higher grade, including 10.4 grams over 1.5 meters, for instance. A lot of visible gold, both in drill core and in surface sampling. And it was during the trenching in 2023 where we went back to where the prospector initially discovered gold at Conquest and stripped that off with an excavator. And that's where we started finding not only more visible gold, crustiform, coliform banded quartz veins, which again are indication that you're getting close to the boiling zone or perhaps even into the boiling zone. And adularia, which is a potassium mineral. And when you start seeing that, it's certainly, again, key evidence that you're getting closer to the hotter portions of the system, which is the feeder, and that's what we're looking for. So despite the importance of these gold grades and the good widths, in that drill program that followed up from that trenching in 2023, we also saw some other very important indicators, and that was breccias, sinter material, geyser sediments, and of course boiling textures like coliform bandages, as I just talked about. And so when we started really seeing those textures and understanding what they were, that things really began to come together as far as a geological model at the Conquest zone in Root Cellar. And here are some of these. And to say an analyst in Toronto recently put out a little blog on Northern Shields, and one of the things he opened up with is sometimes the universe is a way of telling you things if you're paying attention. And these rocks certainly, we were paying attention to these rocks when we drilled them in 2023 because they are telling you a story about Root Cellar. So a lot of the drilling in 2023 hit a variety of breccias. They're all mineralized, some of them low grade. Again, here's the part of the interval of 34 meters at 0.6, but there's visible gold in it with sporadic higher grades of 9 grams. But they're all mineralized and all heavily hydrothermally altered. These are part of what's called the hydrothermal vent breccia, and you often find these at the very top of epithermal systems. The diagram on the left is an example from the Waihi epithermal system in New Zealand, produced about 7 million ounces, still producing gold, 7 million ounces and about 42 million ounces of silver. Above a lot of their vein systems, they have very similar hydrothermal vent breccias. Sometimes they trend right down into the main veins. Sometimes there's a small gap between the veins itself. And at the time, we began to realize whether they're part of the main system or not, but they're more likely these are sort of an umbrella that form near the top of the main vein systems in epithermal gold systems. Even more important than the breccias, we started seeing in drill core what we described at the time as very muddy-looking sedimentary rocks. Of course, these are all solidified right now, but they're not volcanic rocks, which everything else we see in Root Cellar is volcanic rocks. We see no sedimentary rocks except for in one or two drill holes. And these are hot spring sediments. So these are equivalent to sediments that would be forming in the pools that surround, for instance, the Yellowstone geyser. And the Yellowstone geyser represents the top of an epithermal system. If you go down below that, drill into that, you will find an epithermal system. How much gold it carries, we don't know, but it's an epithermal system. And so these these hot spring sediments indicate we're at the top of the system. We also found these silicious rocks called Sinter. They're also at the very top of an epithermal system. So very conclusively, from 2023 and into 2024, we learned without a doubt that we're at the very top of an epithermal system. So that's important because it tells us two things. Number one, the system is intact. It hasn't been eroded. Even though these are probably on the order of 300 to 500 million years old, it has not been eroded. The complete system is intact. And the best part, what we call the boiling zone or the bonanza zone, is below the Sinter mound. So even though we're finding visible gold up here right now, technically in these epithermal systems, the best part is still yet to come. And just an example of how important Sinters are as a sort of vector to the mineralization, here's an example from Fruta del Norte, which was operated by Aurelian in 2006 to 2012, I believe. And again, it was even more deeply buried than what we have at Root Cellar, about 200 meter of essentially barren rock above that, but there was evidence of a little bit of gold leaking to surface. They recognized the chemistry and the signatures of that as coming from an epithermal system, drilled a few holes, the first missed, but then they hit the Sinter. They recognized the importance of the Sinter that represented the top of a vein system and steepened the hole. The next hole hit 240 meters of about 4 grams per ton gold, and the rest is history. So these Sinters are very important in marking the top of an epithermal vein system. The only sometimes questions about them is, at Fruta del Norte, for example, the main veins were right underneath the Sinter terrace, whereas in other examples around the world, particularly in some of these Mexico epithermal systems, you may have a gap of about 200 or 300 meters before you get into the boiling zone and the higher grades of gold. So again, at Root Cellar, we don't know whether the veins are starting right below it or deeper. My gut feeling is they're pretty close because we're already getting gold up here, including visible gold, and that's highly unusual. You don't see a lot of gold above the Sinter terrace. So here's an example of little fragments of Sinter. This rock actually has visible gold, so at some point gold was brought up to that level of the Sinter mound. And I say both in drill core and more importantly in the trenching, we start seeing these classic banded quartz veins that we call crustiform, coliform banded quartz veins with vugs. And that's an indication too that at least we're getting closer on the very fringe of the boiling zone, which is where your gold precipitation is going to happen in these epithermal systems. So highly unusual to be getting that amount of gold at that level. And I say that's what I encourage us, is that we may be on to quite a high grade system as well as a large system at Root Cellar. I think it's really started to come together earlier this year. We always knew that the gold mineralization in the Conquest zone was sat above a magnetic low, but we really focusing on some 3D modeling of that magnetic low early this year, and this is the shape we get. And if you remember back to that classic epithermal model, I'll go back to it right now. This sort of tree-like shape or Y-like shape. The magnetic model matches that very, very closely. And the magnetic, again, this is a magnetic low. Based on the modeling, it extends to a depth of around 800 meters, so considerable depth. And most interesting of all is that the discovery trench with the Sinter fragments and the 2023 drilling with the Sinter fragments and the gold sits right up in here. From this, there's an arm sort of protruding up, and all that drilling took place in here. And I say it's right on the tip of this branch or this arm, so it's hard not to believe that the rest of this branch of this magnetic low is not somehow related to that epithermal system. And of course, it goes down into a much larger, trunk, or if you want to call it that, of the tree or the epithermal system. So the fact that we're drilling up in here, getting the Sinter fragments, I say it very, very, confident building that the rest of this magnetic low is related to that epithermal system. Then even over here, this photograph was actually taken just a few weeks ago when I was down here. We have some very pyritic and weekly gold anomalous rhyolite sitting up in here. We see quite a large patch of it, actually. And so, again, this is probably where gold from down in here has leaked up to surface through fractures and along contacts of, in this case, the rhyolite. Interestingly, too, we see a sort of a change in the morphology of this magnetic low below this sort of brown dashed line here. And below that, the magnetic signature tends to get, number one, stronger and sort of more bulbous. And what that looks like has happened is as the fluids have percolated up one of the main structures, they hit what we think was a layer of a rock that was formed partway through the hydrothermal system, basically capped all those fluids from coming to surface. And so they sort of pooled underneath this cap rock. And so there's potential here to have, where those hydrothermal fluids pooled, to have very large intersections, widths of gold mineralization, as well as potentially very high grade. So in the upcoming program, we're going to target in and around here. This is what we call the Hodder's Pond vein target. And of course, keep tracking the Sinter mound vein at depth. And I think once we get below this level here, we'll start to see better grades and more consistent grades. So this is a view looking west into the magnetic low. Just have a look at it from a different point of view, looking southwards now, same sort of big tree-like structure. You can clearly see this bulbous magnetic low. And interesting enough, we have an IP chargeability anomaly that corresponds exactly to the top of that magnetic low. And when the geophysicists modeled this IP, we didn't really want to see a flatline IP anomaly. We expected to see something that had a vertical extent. Now, it could be that. It could be that we're just looking at the very top of a deeper vertical IP structure. But I say originally we were a little bit concerned or in disbelief that it was flatline, but once you model that magnetic low, very clearly it corresponds to this flatline sort of contact, or I believe are the contact rocks and the host rocks in the main part of the epithermal system. So everything was beginning to come together, both on the geochemical side, on the mineralogy side in 2023, and then say early this year with the modeling in 3D of the magnetic low. Everything really came together. Now we have a very compelling drill target going into this drill program. And so the focus will start, following down the Discovery Trench, down this sort of arm of the branch, and also just to the west at the Hodder's Pond vein system. And so that's what it looks again in plan view. Here's what we call the Sinter mound, the Sinter terrace with the geyser sediments. So go back in here. A lot of the drilling, initial drilling will probably start here shallower than going to depth. And then deeper holes here, trying to hit this level, which is about 200 meters down. By the time we step back, they're sort of 400-meter holes. Again, the IP is really strongest on the sort of flanks of that magnetic low here and again over here. But the strongest portion of the low itself is in the center. So we're not really sure whether to target the IP in the flanks or the center. But so a lot of these holes will go through and test the IP and the center of the magnetic anomaly. A few holes at the eastern end of the Conquest zone. This is really following up on some of the drilling from 2021. And, that very high grade boulder of 111 grams per ton that we've yet to find a source, but we do see rocks very similar to the host rock of that gold in outcrop in this area. And we got a nice IP chargeability anomaly in the area too. So short holes in here. And we have an IP target up here that's sort of a ring around a large magnetic target here in the middle. In 2021, we did hit copper mineralization and drill holes that just skimmed the flanks of this IP chargeability, marked now in green hash marks. And so we'll probably test the heart of this IP target, but more likely it's leading towards a copper target just from what we saw in the other holes. But the big focus is on what we call the Hodder's Pond vein and the Sinter, which both has very strong supporting geochemistry, gold values, IP, magnetics, and geochemistry. And so we don't think it gets much better than this from when you're trying to find a blind epithermal gold system. And just to talk a little bit about the logistics, and again, the importance of location of Root and Cellar. Here's the Conquest zone. Here's the end of a road that you can really get to. You don't even need really 4x4. You can get here with an old 1990 two-wheel drive Datsun if you wanted to. The geologist department is going to be down here and just outside of Marystown. We got the drillers here. We've got, Canadian Tire. So when things go wrong with the drill or whatever, you've got your main shopping nearby. Core logging is right in the center of Marystown. And so when it comes to, exploration, you really have that opportunity of finding something that's so close to infrastructure. And of course, we've got a large deep water port just outside of Marystown. And so access is excellent. Drilling costs are on the order of probably just under $200 or at $200 a meter, all in drilling costs. That's extremely low, and we think will be representative of future exploration and development costs. And that's why we think, other than the technical evidence of what we think we have at Root Cellar, it's backed up by just having a really excellent location, and you just don't get these opportunities very on for brand new discoveries with such good infrastructure in place. And so we talked a lot about Conquest. As I say, now we're just backing up and taking a bigger view of the whole property. Conquest is only one portion of the gold showings. We have 5 other gold showings. We think Windfall is actually ultimately connected to Conquest. Still got to do work on Drop Zone and certainly Braxton Bradley. And then this huge copper porphyry target we have right at the end of southwest portion of the property, and it's probably actually cut by Conquest. We think the copper porphyry is older, and the epithermal event came later, overprinting the copper porphyry. Of course, copper porphyries and epithermals are end members of the same hydrothermal system, so it's not unusual to have them together. But typically, the copper porphyries are much deeper than the gold. So if you're seeing the gold, you're never going to get to the copper. But through various mechanisms, telescoping or faulting, you can occasionally get them sort of side by side, and maybe that's what's happened here. So the focus is definitely the gold at the Conquest Zone, but going down the road, we're going to start, as we understand the geometry and the geology of the gold, it helps us with the copper. And so, Conquest is as exciting as it is. It's only a small portion of what we have at Root Cellar. And so, as we think there's a very unique opportunity here. Surface sampling has outlined a very large gold anomalous area just at the Conquest Zone, about 4 square kilometers. We have tellurium, a critical metal, so has added value in itself. But as I indicated, I like it because it's an indication of large gold system. And tellurium you never find tellurium on its own, or very, very rarely. It's basically found as a byproduct of certain epithermal gold systems and copper porphyries. And I said, importantly, the trenching and the drilling last year has identified that Sinter mound, and that marks the top of the epithermal system. So it's intact, and it looks like it goes to depth. Obviously, we see a lot of high grade, 78 grams per ton now, and outcrop 111 grams per ton in Boulder. And I say we're not even into the boiling zone. So that's, we're sitting up here, and and we're already getting gold. So it bodes very well as to what we hope to find down at depth. And I say it's not just one set of evidence. We have multiple sets of data that's all been pointing in the same direction the last few years. I say even work by an MSc thesis using some very innovative geochemical plots completely reinforce our visual observations of the Sinter as being the top of an outflown zone, and he came at it from a totally different point of view. But all the data is pointing in the same direction, and that gives us a lot of confidence when going into a drill program like this. And of course, Northern Shield owns 100% of Root Cellar, and as I said, it's located in Newfoundland, minutes away from a paved highway and deep water port on the Atlantic seaboard. And I think that's going to become important, especially with we sink our teeth into a copper porphyry at the same time. And it's just one of multiple gold showings on the property. And of course, we have first mover status, not just obviously on Root Cellar itself, but we have a very good understanding of the surrounding area. We have a very good relationship with the prospector that found Root Cellar, and he has multiple other projects, both gold and copper porphyries, that I find extremely interesting. And so we do have sort of first mover status on this and have a good knowledge of the geology and the prospector. So, as I say, we don't believe the exploration opportunities and the investment opportunities gets much better than the technical evidence we have and the location of where this is located. So we're very excited to be going into this drill program. We closed the financing last month for about $500,000. We're just about to close another one for $300,000. So we're financed now for the 3,000 meter drill program, which we were trying to build up to, and we now have that. And we have a drill contract signed, so we should be starting to drill in early June. So that really concludes my presentations. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ian, for the great presentation. We'll kick off the Q&A session. There were some questions that were submitted upon registration. What are the key milestones or results you're hoping to achieve with this upcoming drill program, and how would success in this phase impact Northern Shield's overall development timeline for the project?
Sorry, Kyle, can you just repeat that? You broke up there at the beginning.
No problem. What are the key milestones or results you're hoping to achieve with this upcoming drill program, and how would success in this phase impact Northern Shield's overall development timeline for the project?
Well, we think we can get right into the heart of the system and get something that's going to just totally transform the exploration program, that we can get in the heart, get good gold intercepts, high-grade gold of good widths. Even if that's just in one or two holes, we think that will move this forward very, very rapidly. Of course, there's always end members of an early stage exploration. You can either get right into the heart of it right away, or you keep sort of getting the fringes of it. There's still a lot to learn, especially when you go deeper down. You might be, as long as you're getting indications that you're in the epithermal systems, maybe you're drilling parallel to the structure you really want. Which case that's a little bit slower timeline to develop, but I have no doubt we'll hit. You go back to 2023, we had only enough money to drill a 500-meter drill program, and we didn't have the knowledge that we have today. And we hit gold mineralization in 7 out of 8 holes, including 3 with the visible gold. So with a 3,000-meter program, yes, we're going deeper, but with a 3,000-meter program, the knowledge we have, I expect we're going to get some good grades over good widths. And if that happens, that will see a very rapid advancement in exploration and just a speed up in exploration. I think we'll just continue to roll through one drill program after another with that success. So I think you'll see a rapid step up in exploration and drilling at Root Cellar after this.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat. Do you see this as a district level potential?
Well, there's certainly district, level potential, because there's I said the whole Avalon, not just the Burin, but the whole Avalon is underexplored, and even those epithermals that have been explored just haven't seen the attention of similar systems in BC, for instance. We also have, I think, a better understanding. Now, some of that understanding may just be confined to the immediate Root Cellar area, but some of it I think we can transport to other districts within the Burin and the Avalon. But district scale, but I still think that Root Cellar, particularly Conquest, is the kingpin of that. Sometimes when you get very, very large systems, you don't get a lot of other things going on. But there are other alteration zones. The prospector has 2 other projects nearby that very much interest me. And if we can get some momentum here, I'd strongly look at acquiring those. So a lot of the district is already locked up. So yes, there is a district potential here, but Root Cellar is still standing out as being very different. The tellurium, for instance, there is one other occurrence that has some tellurium nearby. But Root Cellar is standing out as perhaps being the center of that district.
Gotcha. I believe you already addressed this question. Do we have an official start date for drilling? And then a follow-up question. Is it the same drill team as before?
So the start date, barring anything unusual with either the drillers or weather, is in and around June 10th. So it's basically a different drill team than what we used in 2023 and 2021. You'll see an announcement on that very shortly. But June 10th will take a day or two, unless something unusual happens, either with the contractors or weather. But that's what we're gearing up to right now.
And would you use the same labs you used as last time? An individual is wondering how long to receive assay results after drilling, how long if you were to rush assays?
Yes, we're using the same lab as always. It's very important because even though the methods is the same, there's always a slight variation, so we never want to compare apples to oranges. I mean, gold is gold, but it's more the other elements that we want a level playing field on, so we like going back to the same lab. Turnaround time, I think typically is probably on the order, I mean, they say 4 weeks, but it's probably more like 4 to 8 weeks. In rushing, you can get it done, I think, 2 weeks perhaps. So some samples, if necessary, will be rushed, but otherwise I would bank on a good 6 to 8 weeks for turnaround time for large batches of samples in the summer.
Thank you. Based on your recent visit to the site, have there been any unexpected challenges or opportunities you've encountered that weren't previously factored into your planning at the Root Cellar Project?
No, I mean, the only kind of not really thing that factored in was actually having a closer look, and it's outside of Root Cellars, having a closer look at one of the prospectors projects that he has just south of Root Cellar, and I've been aware of it for some time, but I had a closer look at his data, and that kind of really jumped out as me as another project that needs a lot of work. 10 kilometer strike length of gold mineralization. But as far as Root Cellar, no, I was just really going down there to secure, logging facilities, checking access to the drill pads, things like that. And it just reminded me, we have 2 options on a logging facility, but it just reminded me, as I showed by that little map, how easily accessible and how lucky we are with having, existing infrastructure nearby, and not only that, very willing people. Like, everybody's trying to help. One place we went to, as an example, to try to see if we can rent space for them because they had a warehouse space, and they said no, they have no room. But right away, they reached out to other people that they knew in the area and found us what we believe is a space to log core. So everybody in and around Marystown is very helpful. They want to see this project succeed, and they say you don't get that everywhere in this day and age. So I was just reminded, it's very opposite of challenges. It just reminded me of what a fantastic place to work this Marystown is, and not only like on the geological side of how well endowed the mineralization seems to be, but its access and the willingness of people to help you succeed.
Thank you for that. We have another question in the chat here. So we know 3,000 meters is planned. How many holes roughly would that be?
We're still fine tuning it, but it's going to be on the order of 8 to 10. Some of these holes that we sort of plan around 450 meters, you never know if you're in mineralization or if you haven't hit the magnetic low that we're targeting, you'd push it. So it's on the order of 8 to 10 drill holes.
Okay, thank you. Could you share some details, and I believe you had a slide on this already, but about the infrastructure and logistical preparations currently underway to support the June drill program?
Yeah, I mean, as I just go back to this image here, as I say, it's, Northern Shield, in its sort of previous life, all our work was very remote, helicopter and float plane access, and that had a cost to it, which was helicopters. And, and with money harder and harder to come by for junior exploration, that became a problem. And so years ago, we started looking at areas that were underexplored or not explored, which one of our criteria was to explore in areas that were completely underexplored. But it's hard to find those that are accessible as Root Cellar and a lot of other targets in Newfoundland. And so this just exemplifies that to a T, how underexplored Newfoundland is, and how this project in particular, how perfectly well it's situated. When you have a deep water port access, you have infrastructure, you have a underemployed population, and everybody willing to help you there. It doesn't really get better than this. So I'd say simple things like when drills break down, which unfortunately they do from time to time, some more frequently than you want, you're not far from, and I mean, not just Canadian Tire, there's a lot of heavy equipment operators and mechanics here. And so you have, 10 minutes, you can walk from here to the end of the road, ATV in 5 or 10 minutes. You're in your car, and in 10 minutes you're in town, and if something's broken, you're getting it fixed. The geologist can make multiple trips to the drill to keep a better eye on it when they're getting near that critical area. So it's, and these are why the drilling costs and the exploration costs are much cheaper than in a lot of places, because it's very, very accessible, and it's a lot easier to find. Geologists, we all like being outdoors, but sometimes 3 months in a tent 100 miles from anywhere gets a little bit tiring. And here you have something that you can stay in a nice Airbnb or apartment, and you can get your Tim Hortons coffee or whatever you want, and it's still hot when you get to the drill. So when it comes to infrastructure, it really doesn't get much better than this.
No, certainly. So you have cash for this drill program, but everyone wants to always know what's next. We got a question here. What potential partnerships or finance and options is Northern Shield considering to advance the Root Cellar Project through its next phase of development following this drill program?
Well, when we get to the next phase, I think results will probably speak for themselves. We're always talking to various potential partners. I think every junior mining company does that right now. We have the financing in place, as mentioned, just through private equity markets. But yeah, Root Cellar has been attracting attention the last few months. It wouldn't, one point we thought we may have a partner before the drill program, but I'm glad we went this way right now. We have obviously very strong retail support, and I think a good intersection and drill core is going to speak for itself, and if that's the case, I don't think any future partners will be hard to come by.
Well said. I believe that's it for the questions we have for today, Ian. So thank you, and thank you everyone that participated and asked questions. If you came in a little late, there will be a recording of this, and our team will make sure it's available within the next couple of hours here. But I'll pass it over to you, Ian, for any final words before we close off.
Yeah, we're very excited for this upcoming drill program. I know it's been a long time, but we've had it's been obviously very tough markets for the juniors, especially those that are exploring as far upstream as Northern Shield does. But we think that hard work has paid off. I don't think I've been on a project in the 25 years of running Northern Shield where you have so much supporting information, all pointing in the same direction. And, Mother Nature can play cruel jokes on you, but there's a lot of supporting data there. And I think we're onto something significant here, and I look forward to drilling.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time.